Hello, Pastor Doug, back again from the video. Today I want to do a reaction to a top 100 list of the top 100 best Christian theology books of all time. This is a list that supposedly has been researched by the magic of the internet, by looking at different sites and ratings and sales, and this is, kind of the neutral approach to the best works of theology of all time. So we're going to power through this. Maybe I'll get through all 100. I don't want to make this a long video, but I thought it'd be fun to interact with it. So number one of the greatest Christian theological book of all time is C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. I love this book. This is a great book for an introduction to the faith to someone who's educated but doesn't know much about Christianity. Beautiful book. Huge C.S. Lewis fan. Lewis would be gravely offended that he was on the list of number one. If you're talking about something much more substantial, something like The City of God by Augustine, but, a good book. Number two, The Case for Christ, Lee Strobel. Okay book. It's helpful. It takes the evidentialist approach to proving Christianity, which I'm not a huge fan of, but, it is helpful. Okay, sure. Screwtape Letters, love that book. One of my all-time favorite books. Again, not one of the more meatier theological works, but certainly a great read. I love that book. Number four, Knowing God by J.I. Packer. That is an amazing book. Highly recommend it. Notice, I think these are going to be top 100 popular books, so let's take it that approach. So, Knowing God, well worth your read. Amazing book. The Reason for God by Keller. I'll be honest, I am not a huge Keller fan. I think he's the thinking man's Rick Warren. He says some good things. He's a very good writer, but there's a liberal tinge to him that bothers me. There's a desire to speak in such a way and accommodate in such a way to the culture that I find troubling. So, not a huge fan. The Cost of Discipleship by Bonhoeffer. Beautiful read. John, of course, was a Lutheran pastor who was executed during the reign of Nazi Germany. Interesting read and good to read. And by the way, he's a Lutheran, so if you're just coming from the evangelical tradition, you might have a hard time, but I would definitely recommend it. The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis, same thing. Love Lewis, anything by Lewis. King James Bible, sure, why not? We'll have that. It's number 8, that's kind of funny. The Problem of Pain, again, beautiful work by Lewis. I strongly would recommend it. The Confessions by Augustine, of course, one of the greatest works of theology ever, maybe the greatest works of theology ever. And it's encouraging that something that's a classic has made the top 10. Let's see what else. The Prodigal God by Keller. Again, I'm not a fan by Keller. That's scary. He's so much on this list. Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, that famous work. 17th, 18th? Oh my, I forgot. 17th century? I hope that's right. Puritan, a wonderful allegory about the Christian faith. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of it. The theology is spot on, but I find it just kind of heavy reading. That's my personal preference, but amazing work and one of the great works of the English Puritan tradition. No doubt about it. Crazy Love, Francis Chan. Have not read it. I've only listened to one of Chan's sermons. I've heard bad things about him. I've heard he's generally pretty watered down. I should probably be careful. I don't know him. The circles I run in, we don't really talk about him, so no comment, but I guess I'd have some concerns. The Practice of the Presence of God, Brother Lawrence. I read one book by Brother Lawrence. Interesting. Again, not necessarily my speed. I've not read this book, so no comment. The Knowledge of the Holy by Tozer. Many people love Tozer. He is very intense. I find him very much a pietist. He's not my favorite. It's a very works-based approach to the Christian faith. It can be very convicting, and that's a good thing. Not my first choice, but many people love him. A Systematic Theology by Wayne Grudem. This is the most popular evangelical systematic theology written in recent times. I would say this, I think it's the most organized systematic theology I've ever read. It is easy to read, it's well put together, but Grudem is all over the lot. When it comes to the doctrine of salvation, he's reformed, but he's a dispensationalist, he's a charismatic, he's a weird hybrid. Like I said, very well put together, very easy to read, but be careful, he's kind of a theological oddball. C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. awesome. Great work of fiction. Strongly recommend it. The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul, maybe Sproul's greatest work. Again, highly recommended. This is a great choice. Well worth your read. Surprised by Hope, N.T. Wright. Not a huge N.T. Wright fan. Wright is a brilliant scholar. He's very educated, writes very well. And when he focuses on things like the resurrection, he's quite good. He's kind of a liberal scholar who believes in some conservative things. But when it comes to things like the gospel, he's way off. So read N.T. Wright with caution. Forgotten by God, Chan, again, no comment on Tran. Keller, I've read this. It's okay. I feel bad because Keller is not my favorite. The Pursuit of God by Tozer. Again, same thing for Tozer. If you want an intense book about what to do, Tozer is a great read, but careful. You're not going to get much gospel from him. Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton is one of those people, you love him or hate him. He is a brilliant 19th century Englishman, Roman Catholic, if I remember correctly. Some people think he is the most witty person ever, and how Doug Wilson loves him. I find him a difficult read. I find him a very difficult read. It just, that 19th century Victorian prose kind of turns me off. By all means, give it a read. It would improve at least your vocabulary, but not my first choice. Life Together, Bonhoeffer, again, very good Lutheran pastor, well worth reading. A Celebration of Discipleship by Richard J. Foster. I confess I have known nothing of this book. Got no clue. Keep on going. The Cross of Christ by John Stott, mid-20th century Anglican theologian. Well worth the read. Good guy. Believes in annihilationism. Kind of troubling, but, but besides that, generally evangelical. Pretty good. Radical by David Platt. Oh, this was back when missionalism was all big, and this is dated. It's not that helpful. It's very culturally driven. I would pass. My Utmost for His Highest, Oswald Chambers, a classic, many people's favorite devotional book. Amazing work. The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. Love it. One of my all-time favorite C.S. Lewis books. And by the way, if you get the audio tape version, interestingly, Lewis reads it, and you get this very great deep English voice. So that's a fun audio book. What's next? Introduction to Christian Theology, Alistair McGrath. I took some of McGrath's classes when I did a semester at Oxford. He is a very good professor, a generic evangelical, generic Anglican. If you're looking for strident, hardcore evangelical theology, he's not him. But considering the system he's in, the British evangelical academic elites, he's a moderate, but a very good organizer, a very clear writer, and I would recommend it. What's next? A Grief Observed, C.S. Lewis. Again, awesome. Love C.S. Lewis. John Piper, Desiring God. I'm not a Piper fan. I know he's a solid reform guy. on a personal level, his emotional approach, not my favorite, and more substantively, I'm not a huge fan of his pietism. I think there's too much of a pietist streak to him, and a lot of people, sincere, wonderful Christians, love him. Not my speed. If you like him, awesome. Surprised by Joy, again, I spent all day talking about C.S. Lewis. Wonderful book, and of course, the irony of that is his future wife would be named Joy, but the book is not about Joy. It's written before her. That's interesting. The Shack, this is a piece of horrible heresy. I had to read this many decades ago, and it became hip in the church. It's garbage. It will lead you astray. Don't read it, and it's just horribly written. So we are. Evangelism, the Sovereignty of God by J.I. Packer. This is an amazing book. I would highly recommend it, and the introduction itself is well worth it. That is a beautiful book. Heaven by Randy Alcorn. Haven't read it. No comment. Chosen by God by R.C. Sproul, an amazing book. Again, strongly recommend this. Bonhoeffer, I believe this is the biography. Yeah, that's a good read. I read this one, Eric. That's a good read. And again, an interesting figure. Again, my warning, he's a Lutheran, conservative Lutheran, not an American evangelical. And there's a lot of differences there. Number 39, Piper, Don't Waste Your Life. Haven't read it. Again, same criticism about Piper. Man, a lot of Keller. Moving on from Keller. The Pursuit of Holiness by Jerry Bridges. Sorry. I've not read this. I don't think I've read this, so I'm going to say no comment. The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Very famous medieval work. I would read it as a historical interest. It's very Roman Catholic. I would not do this practice if you were Protestant. So stay away from it, in my opinion. And again, read it for historical, so you want something that's historically interesting. Institutes of the Christian Religion by John Calvin. I think all Christians should read this, and it should be one of your top books you read in your life. Followed closely by The City of God. Yay, got 2 titles in a row here. This is, again, I think required. We're reading, I would argue, I think these 2 books are the number 1 and number 2 list of some of the best books you can read, period. Delight in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. I've not read this, so no comment. Again, Keller's Meaning of Marriage. He's kind of like a liberal complementarian. It's okay, but again, Keller, way too much Keller is on this list. Just Do Something by Kevin DeYoung and Joshua Harris, very famous folks. I've not read it. I've heard okay things. No comment. Counterfeit Gods by Tim Keller, more Keller. The Gospel According to Jesus by John MacArthur. That is a very good book. I would recommend it. Blue Like Jazz, Don Miller. Yeah, I read this again a couple decades ago when the whole missional movement was crazed. This was hip when it came out. Was it the early aughts, or was it late 90s? I think it was the early aughts. It was hip back then. It's out of date now. It's trying to be trendy Christianity. No. The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. Absolutely yes. The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis. I just actually recently listened to the sermon. Beautiful. Philip Yancey's What's Amazing by Grace. I remember reading this back in the day, and I don't know, just to me, I don't like light, fluffy things, and it didn't work for me. Simply Jesus, N.T. Wright, again, same warning about Wright. Keller, we talked about him. Overcoming Sin and Temptation by John Owen. So they made John Owen, easy to read? The Wrights, John Owen, a challenge to read. Yep. Okay, so it's a compliment. I've not read this particular text, but John Owen is well worth your read, and his discussion on sin is beautiful. Not a fan, becoming a complete, committed follower of Jesus. Never heard of it. No idea. Everybody, always. Don't know it. Bob Goff. More Than a Conqueror, Josh McDonald. Good book. Again, More Than a Carpenter, sorry. Good book from an evidential point of view, defending the historicity of Christ. Okay. Again, I'm not an evidentialist, but so be it. The Disciples of Grace, Jerry Bridges. I'm doing this cold. So, you know what? I was thinking of a Puritan writer. Nope, I have not read this. So, no comment here. On the Incarnation, St. Athanasius, absolutely worth reading. One of the great defenders of the faith, Making Sense of God, again, Keller. Nope, Mortification by Sin, by John Owen, one of the great Puritans, if not the greatest Puritan writer. Well worth your read. Definitely go for that. None Like Him by Jen Wilkin. Never heard of it. No idea. Story of a Soul. I don't know it. Probably a Roman Catholic thing. Not read this. The Essential Truths of the Christian Faith, R.C. Sproul. A wonderful book. Strongly recommend it. Sorry, I got flipping there. How Should We Live Then? Francis Schaeffer. I enjoy Schaeffer. He's interesting. He's very much a prophet. He kind of saw the destruction of the West, in the 60s and 70s. Not my favorite author, but again, more for style reasons. But Francis Schaeffer, well worth your read. Interesting work. The Passion of Jesus Christ, again, back to paper. Basic Christianity by John Stott. Very good introduction. And Rick Warren. Oh, maybe I'll have to take that back. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't realize Warren did an introduction to Stott's work. Wow, better move on. Anyways, Everyone's Good Endeavor, Keller. Way too much Keller on this list. Momentary Marriage, Piper. Again, Piper's a liberal complementarian. Some okay things about marriage, but a lot of it's cultural driven. Again, we're talking Keller. All right, The Attributes of God by author W. Pink. This is well worth your read. This is a great book describing the basic characteristics of God. That is a good read. Simple Christianity, N.T. Wright. I read this. Again, you ask him what the gospel is, and you get no clear message because he so dislikes the concept of justification by faith alone, and he's so unclear. It's frustrating, and the man is brilliant. So again, way too much Wright, way too much Keller on this list. New Morning Mercies, a daily gospel devotion by Paul David Tripp. I've not read this. I've heard of Tripp, haven't read it. Future Grace by Piper. Say anything about Piper? Oh, The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone. A very, very famous black liberation theologian. Hardcore politics, hardcore left-wing neo-Marxist approach. I could not recommend it. If you want to read it as a political tool, that's fine to learn what's going on out there, but terrible theology. Jesus Among Other Gods, Ravi Zacharias, of course, had a major fall from grace, which we found out after his death. A lot of people like Zacharias, has some good stuff. Truth is truth. But obviously led a double life. We're back with Keller. Ignore that. Praying the Bible by Whitney. Don't know this. Haven't read it. Through Grates of Splendor, Elizabeth Elliot. I've always wanted to read some Elliot. I have not, so I can't comment on it. Moving on. Concise Theology by J.I. Packer. I think this is the best simple theology out there. If you want a theology that's very short, it comes in little sniglets, like just 2 pages long topics. It's ranged 2 pages long almost on every major topic. It's a wonderful book. I actually recently worked through it with a Tuesday morning study. Great little simple book. The Explicit Gospel, Matt Chandler and Gerald Wilson. I'm not a fan of. I haven't read it, so I'll say no comment. Love Does by Bob Goff. Never heard of him. Don't know. Be the Bridge. Sorry, Morrison. Don't know about it. Christian Beliefs, Wayne Grudem and Elliot Grudem. Haven't read this. Again, we talked about Grudem's systematic theology. So, again, no comment. If you notice, I don't read too many of the modern popular stuff. So, sorry. N.T. Wright on the resurrection. Again, Wright is good on the resurrection. He does a good job defending the historicity of the resurrection. It just when it comes to the gospel, he goes off the deep end. Prince Caspian, yay. C.S. Lewis, more fiction, great. Church history in plain language. Yes, I have this. I was trying to remember because I have a couple simple books I've used in various courses. This is pretty good if you want a simple overview. Not bad. Spiritual Discipline for the Christian Life, Whitney and J.I. Packer. I don't know this. I don't know who Whitney is, but if Packer likes it, that could be a good sign. I'm a huge fan of Packer. Wild at Heart, revised and updated. Haven't read it, no comment. I'm striking out a lot here, aren't I? Total Truth. Liberty and Christianity from the Culture of Captivity. I'm halfway through this. It's a political thing. It's some interesting points. We're in such interesting times. I agree with the general premise, though, that we have to be very careful not to tie the faith to anything too political. Hind's Feet in High Places, never heard of it. The Whole Christ by Sinclair Ferguson and Timothy Keller. It's a good book. This one's a good book. I think Ferguson brings some solid foundation. Awesome. Oh, look at this, a classic. The Bruised Reed by Richard Sibbes. That is one of the great Congregationalists. This is well worth the read, this ancient Puritan work about dealing and helping those in the church who are the weakest of faith. That the Puritans love to quote this line from Isaiah 42, do not bend the bruised reed, do not break the bruised reed, that God is kind to the weakest, and it is a great read. That's a wonderful book. The Bait of Satan, I don't know what it is. Moving on, Racing Hell, Francis Chan, don't know it. A Gospel Primer for Christians, don't know it. The Bondage of the Will, required reading, classic work that began the Reformation. And finally, we're with Piper. When I Don't Desire a God, haven't read it. Did read Desiring God. Again, not a huge Piper fan, but there's a lot of gold there. Well, I hope that helps. I did 100 really quickly. And you noticed when we hit the more modern stuff, I haven't read some of it. There's a lot out there. But I thought that was an interesting read. Obviously, Keller is very popular, which is a bit disconcerting. I would strongly recommend, though, reading the classics. Go get your Augustine, go get your Calvin. That'll probably be the best place to go. Well, I hope that helps. As always, Christ's grace and peace to you all. Amen.